an African hero, and also I am proud to say a friend. We don't need to make much introductions about President Tabo Mbeki, who, as I mentioned a short while ago, was the man who succeeded Nelson Mandela, and that's an honor and a burden. And he's also a man of all of Africa. He has been helping us in Sudan, and I remember I visited with him Darfur in 2009. We went to the camps in around El Fasher and then around Niala, and I was really impressed by the way he was just sitting there in the camp, listening to people, trying to understand what are the issues, very patiently for hours on end. And I said to myself at that time, if the Sudanese officials did this and come and listen to the people, we would have probably solved half of the problem. And since then, he has been also doing work. After that, he also helped Sudan and South Sudan with the peace process, and then with the post-separation process. And he has also been tasked by the African Union to look at peace and security in the region as a whole. Now it's added to his mandate, the Red Sea and the cooperation with the Gulf countries. So he is here in Doha for this purpose of discussing the issues of cooperation. Now we are going, of course, there's going to be a discussion, but what we are going to listen to President Tabo Mbeki for about maybe 15 to 20 minutes to give us an introduction and highlight the issues he's working on and the challenges Africa, the Horn of Africa, is facing within his mandates, and also the challenging peacemaking in the region as a whole, maybe in the African continent, but also what he looks for into the Gulf African cooperation area. So, President Mbeki, please.
Which one do I press? This one. Thanks. Thanks a lot, Abdul Wahab. And I must say thanks to the Center for giving us this opportunity to meet here and to meet all of these important people who are here today. He says, well, I'll speak for 15, 20 minutes. I doubt it. I think it will be less than that. Let me explain, I'm following in his footsteps to explain who we are and why we are here in Doha. We, some time ago, the African Union took a decision that it was important to try and encourage a process of integration in the Horn of Africa. It was really basically in pursuit of goals, fundamental goals, which the African Union is pursuing throughout the continent. And these are these three objectives of peace and stability, economic development, socio-economic development, and integration and unity. That we needed to look at all of these matters with regard to the Horn of Africa. Now, I'm quite certain that all of us here in the room would know which countries constitute the Horn of Africa. But let me mention them. It's Sudan and South Sudan, it's Eritrea, it's Ethiopia, it's Djibouti, Somalia, Kenya, and Uganda. So these are the countries which constitute the Horn in terms of the work that we are doing. So this panel was then mandated by the African Union to engage all of the countries of the Horn to try and encourage them towards addressing these central matters which I've mentioned. Now, as it happened, the Secretary General of the United Nations had also come to a determination that it was important to really focus on the region called the Horn of Africa. And indeed has appointed a special representative to do that. But since the African Union had already taken the initiative, the UN then decided that it had better work together with this panel. Now there's a third element, which is IGAD, a regional organization, intergovernmental organization for the same countries in East Africa. And therefore, this panel is African Union, United Nations, and IGAD. These three organizations are working together on this question. So we then decided that perhaps one of the first things we need to do is to visit each of the countries of the Horn, to talk to the governments, to talk to civil society, to talk to the legislatures, to, in the first instance, to get an understanding of what each of these member countries of the Horn of Africa think about the Horn of Africa. Because in the end, in terms of the kind of integration, development, and so on that we're talking about, we can't impose it. It's got to come from within the member states of the Horn of Africa, fortunately, hopefully with our encouragement. But in the end, they've got to take ownership of that process of regional integration. So it is important, we thought, that we should be familiar ourselves as a panel with the thinking of each of these countries. And the reason we decided we must talk not only to government, but also civil society and so on, was because the project of the integration of the region, it cannot be reduced merely to a matter that is of concern to governments. It's also got to do with people-to-people relations. It's got to do with all sorts of other things. We talk about the economy. It's got to do with how the business communities in the region integrate. And therefore, I'm saying we thought it was important that when we visit each of these countries, we should be able to talk to all of these constituencies, and then in the end to get a view from each of the countries as to what each of them thinks about this project of the integration of the Horn of Africa. We've been to 4 countries so far of the Horn, that's Somalia, Djibouti, Kenya, Uganda, and later this month we should be in Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and hopefully Eritrea. We're trying to finish all of these countries this month. Now, there are certain countries, I'm sure as everybody knows, there are certain countries in the Gulf that are already involved in one way or the other in the Horn of Africa. One of them is, of course, Qatar, particularly involved in Somalia. The UAE also involved, including by setting up military bases. Saudi Arabia is involved. Turkey is involved. So that's the objective reality, that you've got these countries which are already involved in what is happening in the Horn. So we then took a decision that, therefore, it would be it would not be possible fully to elaborate a view about what should happen in terms of that process of the integration of the Horn of Africa without taking into account the views of countries from outside of the Horn, but which are present in the Horn. And therefore, it will be important for us to interact with those countries, to introduce ourselves, first of all, but then to say, you are already a player in the Horn of Africa. What are your own perspectives about your own role and in the related matters? Which is why we are in Doha now. We are going to, as I was saying, we will also visit the UAE, we'll visit Saudi Arabia, we'll visit Turkey to have a similar discussion with them. There's a related matter, which is to do with the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Because a number of the countries in the Horn of Africa are littoral countries. Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Eritrea, Somalia, Djibouti, Red Sea, Gulf of Aden. And therefore are interested in matters relating to the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Whatever these matters might be, including issues of security. But of course, there are counterparts on the Arab side, also on the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. And so there's a natural interest on the part of, I'm saying some, of the countries, African countries in the Horn of Africa, would naturally be interested to say what is happening here, security matters, any other matters, in what is in fact a common waterway. And how do we interact with the people on the other side? So we, sometime last year, we visited Cairo to talk to the then chairperson of the African Union, President Al-Sisi, and to say to him, who is president of the chair of the African Union, that as this subcommittee of the African Union, we are working like this and that and the other. So this matter came up about the Red Sea. And his view was that, well, he told us that they were working with Saudi Arabia and other countries to try and set up some institution so that both the Africans and the Arabs along the Red Sea would be able to have a body, a mechanism by which they interact to address the challenges in terms of the Red Sea, and therefore suggested that before we as a panel did anything about that matter, why don't we wait until they constitute some body to deal with this matter, which have now done. And have established the Red Sea Forum. Council. Is it called a council? The Red Sea Council, constituting the littoral countries. So that's another body, therefore, that we shall have to interact with. That is on matters now to deal with the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden. We were discussing yesterday with some people about the sort of constitution or communique that they issued, the forum, which it seems visualizes the possibility for the council, Red Sea Council, to include countries that are not necessarily littoral countries, but would necessarily be related. If you take, for instance, a country like Ethiopia, in our own view, we think it would be natural, given, for instance, a place of a country like Ethiopia in the Horn of Africa, and its proximity to the Red Sea, and its interaction with countries that are on the Red Sea, that it must be part of the countries that would be interacting with that Red Sea Council. But it seems that the document that they adopted, the Council allows for that kind of interaction to take place. But what I was saying I have to up is that, therefore, there's an interaction we have to deal with the countries of the Horn. We've got to deal with the countries of the Arab world and plus Turkey who are involved in the Horn. We've got to deal with countries on the Red Sea in Gulf of Aden who are related to the Horn of Africa by virtue of being littoral countries. So I was then saying our first task is to finish these visits to the various countries on the Horn, get their own views about their own perspectives, about what they think should happen with regard to the process of the integration of the Horn of Africa. We must do these other countries in the Arab Gulf as well as Turkey to get their own understanding of their own view about their own involvement in the countries of the Horn and so on, as well as then deal with the matter of the Red Sea and the Gulf. In which context I must say that IGAD had taken its own decision that this matter about the future, the relations between countries on the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden and their relations with the countries on the eastern side was important. That was an IGAD decision, and they are pursuing it. But therefore, in a sense, it's then got integrated into this process, because as I was saying, we are not just an African Union panel, but African Union, United Nations, and IGAD. It's clear that at some point, once we've collected all these views, we shall have to sit down to say, what is the general view that is emerging with regard to what needs to be done to address these matters, like of the integration of the Horn of Africa region. As I'm sure everybody can imagine, there are particular challenges that will arise. I think everybody in the region has agreed that one of the critical matters that has to be addressed if we want to make the necessary proper movement with regard to this matter would be, for instance, finally to conclude the war, to end the war in Somalia, because without that peace and stability in Somalia, it's difficult to conceptualize, to visualize in this kind of integration I'm talking about happening. That's clearly one of the challenges that's going to come up. The matter, obviously, is a matter that's very actively on the agenda of the AU now, on the agenda of IGAD, on the agenda of the UN, but it's a matter that we shall have to address. There was a matter which would have had to be addressed, which would have been the issue of the relations between Ethiopia and Eritrea. But fortunately, the governments, Ethiopia and Eritrea, took the steps that they took to end that. Pardon? No, I see, no, don't worry. To address the matter of the tensions between Eritrea and Ethiopia, which had gone on for too long. Fortunately, that matter has been addressed. The issue of peace and security stability in South Sudan would have to be addressed. But fortunately, given the recent developments with the formation of this interim government of national unity, that seems to be an important step forward. I'm sure the people in the House here know that, for instance, there have been tensions between Somalia and Kenya on the issue of the maritime border. It's not a matter that as a panel we're dealing with. fortunate, we are hoping that that matter gets resolved. Because again, at a point when we've got to move forward to say, having made an assessment of the views of everybody, what is the next step? Then matters like that, they come up as possible obstacles to movement forward if they are not resolved. So I'm saying that there are various matters of this kind that are going to arise. I should have mentioned this, that we decided to establish 2 research units to assist the panel. One research unit, which is headed by Dr. Ali, who is here, to deal with the issue of economic integration. Because once we come to the stage of having to make proposals as to what is to be done with regard to that, the view was that we would have to be as practical as possible, to base it on objective reality, not what we wake up to dream about, that our wish is that we should have this and that should happen. But it should be based on objective reality. What are the possibilities? What are the capabilities? Which will obviously raise an important question of capacity. Capacity among the member states themselves. Because as I was saying, in the end, our view is that whatever comes out in the process of that integration must be owned by the countries themselves. So even as we're working with our research people on a matter like that, economic integration, the input of the countries in the region becomes important about the same question. So that I'm saying that the question of capacity will obviously arise as you come to deal with an issue like that. I'm just mentioning matters that it's obvious are going to arise later. They are current. But while we're at this stage of, in a sense, information gathering and opinion gathering, don't pose themselves as immediate challenges to the panel. But we'll certainly do that if, by the time we say that this is what we think should be done, if those matters have not been resolved, then they would have to be addressed. There is a matter which, again, is obvious, now coming across to this side. The problems within the GCC. The quarrels and tensions in the GCC have spilled over into the Horn of Africa. That competition among the countries is having a negative impact on the Horn, because the countries here then, pursue different objectives which are not necessarily consistent with what each of the countries of the Horn wants to achieve. People pursue their own national objectives here, which has a negative impact, which obviously is one of the matters that the panel has to engage with the countries of the GCC. Because in the end, we are by no means saying that countries of the GCC should not be interested and involved in the Horn. We're not chasing anybody away. But the involvement and activity of the countries within the Horn surely needs to be consistent with the views and objectives of those countries themselves, not be contrary to what those countries seek to achieve. So it's a matter that obviously we have to engage, and indeed we had a very good meeting yesterday with His Highness the Emir, and this matter came up as it would naturally come up. And I'm quite sure that it will come up as we visit the other countries. So it's a particular matter that will have to be addressed. I'm quite certain also that as we discuss issues that relate to the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, similar matters will arise because, again, as you would know, the UAE, for instance, as a military presence, is not part of the Red Sea Council. but it's got a military presence in the Red Sea, in the Gulf of Aden. So the issue is, naturally, when you talk about the security of this area, that matter will obviously arise. So it would have to be dealt with, certainly from the point of the perspective of the countries of the Horn. Because the countries of the Horn, one of the things they are preoccupied about is their own security. So the question of who has got a military presence in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden is of importance, so it must arise. So these are challenges, I'm pointing to challenges which are bound to arise as soon as we come to the stage of saying, well, what is to be done next? I should have mentioned that the other research unit, which we have, in addition to the economic one, is the other matters which relate to the politics. When you talk about the politics of integration, people-to-people relations, matters of that kind. So that even as that matter is being addressed, we come at it with a proper, detailed understanding of the situation in the region with regard to those particular areas. Now, this is the Horn of Africa. It's an important region of the African continent, partly because of its location, which is relative now to the Arab Gulf, relative to the Red Sea. The size of the population, 250, 260 million people in this area. And then you've got these countries, our chairperson here would know, for instance, if you took Sudan, before it became two parts, it bordered many countries, 10, 12 countries. So the consequence of that, obviously, is that if something goes radically wrong in Sudan, it immediately impacts on so many other African countries. So I'm trying to make the point that the Horn of Africa is important for the continent in itself, and it's important for the continent in the context of its relations with other countries outside of the continent, and it's important with regard to its own relations with the rest of the continent. So it's an important, in a sense, it's a strategic area from the point of view of the UN, AU, IGAD, well, certainly AU and UN, in terms of its strategic impact in a wider area, wider than just the area of the Horn of Africa. So we've got to pursue the matter within that kind of context. As I'm reporting, I'm just dealing with this Horn of Africa and its related issues. We are really at the beginning of the process of attending to this matter. The last point I'd like to make is that what's encouraged the panel a great deal has been in each of the countries we've visited, that includes Qatar, there has been very enthusiastic, an enthusiastic response to the project. That the matters that we're raising about the need for genuine integration in the Horn, which must address all these issues of peace and security, development, integration, etc., that those matters are very relevant, very important. And I'm saying all of the countries we visited, people have said, we count us as part of the actors who would help to address all of those issues. And I must say, even Qatar, when we're talking to the Emir here, he understood very well the perspective we're putting forward about we want a mutually beneficial partnership. And it's necessary, therefore, that relationship between these countries, this side, who are relating with the Horn of Africa, must really be driven by the interests of the countries of the Horn, and so on. So we had hoped that, given that the center has given us this opportunity, that we would be meeting with people who have views about all of these matters I'm raising, who might have their own opinions, to tell us that you panel are very foolish. These things that you say you are going to achieve, I know you are not going to achieve for the following reasons. No, but whatever the opinion, it would be very, very interesting for us as a panel and empowering to hear what other people are saying about this broad issue that we're raising. It was matter that we're engaged with, and that certainly would help the panel a great deal in its work. And thanks a lot, Abdul Wahab.
We'll now open the. Yeah, thank you. All right. We've now opened the panel for questions.